I think we're live. I think the system is working. Let's see if we've got anybody in the attendees at the moment. Dylan Griffiths. Robert's note taker is back again. Robert himself has never attended, but Robert's note taker has been every day this week. Terrible. Leanne Mitchell, welcome. Hope you're doing all right. Oh, cancel that. Sorry, I nearly did something terrible. That one. Come on. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. There we go. Right. Morning, everybody. Morning, Chris. Morning, Michelle. How you doing?
Good morning. How are
Morning to you.
you?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good. Quick welcome to a few people who've arrived in the room already. So we've got Anna, Dylan, welcome back. Gary Smith, hope everything's well over in Ireland. Jamie Mittermuller is back with us again. Um, Morning, Jerry. Morning, Ryan. How are we doing? Leanne Mitchell, welcome back. Good to see Mary and Rosie in the room as well. Ryan Bowes, how you doing, mates? Sammy Joe Webster, staple of our Christmas sessions. Sean, Steve Summers. Awesome. Good to see so many people back. You join us as we've just been talking alternatives to Turkey. Andrew Vasey, how you doing? Hello from Essex. Um, so Chris, wisely or otherwise, hasn't bought his turkey yet.
True story.
This is yeah, no, this is we're not just building the tension.
No,
Um, so what's your plan, Chris?
well, the plan was to see if we can get something from M&S on Friday morning, but th there seem to have been some suggestions that there might be some offers either at
Mm,
Waitrose or Morrison's or Tesco. So yeah,
yeah.
should probably look around, I think.
Rosie's commenting, and we've already had this conversation, and we can put this one to bed, that it wouldn't be a surprise if Chris was a vegetarian.
Okay, Rosie, sorry to disappoint you, but I grew up in Southern Africa and it's a quite a meat heavy place. So I have never embraced being a vegetarian, but do understand the health benefits and the environmental benefits as well. But yeah, not yet.
No, plate of meat for Chris. So no, that's fair enough. We were just saying that uh, comparing options. So apparently, I think Hannah was telling us that Waitrose are selling off their sort of Christmas turkeys at a rate at the moment. Tesco's, if anybody's getting their food from Tesco's, then they're doing a great deal on beef at the moment, as I spotted yesterday when I was on there. £17 joint of beef for £6.50, which I just can't get my head around. So yeah, gonna fill the freezer with that one. Michelle, what are you up to?
I'm traveling back to Ireland next Monday, so looking
Mm.
forward to that. And it's beef for us for Christmas, fillet steak from our neighbour's farm.
Oh, very good.
So very nice. Looking forward to that.
And I guess 'cause you're back to see your mum, I guess, aren't you?
Yeah, back to see my mum. Yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Whole
yes.
whole family together.
Yeah, together for Christmas. So my mum usually goes to the States, but not this year. So she's just got to put up with me.
Oh, bless. I'm sure she'll be very
Yeah,
happy with that, I have
yeah,
to say.
no, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So do you just put your feet up on Christmas Day and sort of have a large Baileys?
I'll be cooking on Christmas Day, so no feet up for me. Yeah, I look
But
forward to it though. I quite like it. It's quite a military precision operation. So
oh,
yeah.
is it?
But
Yeah. Oh, Sean, yeah, turkey from the local butchers. Yes, yes. Yeah,
Probably has a name and everything.
yeah. Naming the animals is always a dangerous thing from somebody who grew up on a farm. But yeah, we'll skip over that one lightly. But Chris, you having the family to you this year? What's the situation?
Yeah, fairly quiet actually. Just my parents who are down the road in Bristol, so they're about 20 minutes away, and then
Oh, nice.
just the four of us. A bit more family over New Year. But yeah, just looking forward to the break. Um,
Yeah.
I tell you what, we had a controversy on Christmas dinners the other day though, as in should a Yorkshire pudding be on a Christmas dinner? And there was a lot of debate over this, and I hadn't really thought about it.
I've been talked into doing them for the first time this year. I've never done a Yorkshire pudding with a Christmas dinner before, but yeah, Dawn, Sam, definitely agreeing to the Yorkies. Yeah, frozen or fresh?
Ours would probably be frozen.
Why not?
I feel there's a lot already going on Christmas Day, so I think sort of I think frozen Yorkies can be sort of pardoned, definitely. Oh,
Yeah.
Sean, hubby is a chef. We're all going round to Sean's then. I think that sounds like a darn good idea. Yeah, lovely job, lovely job. We were also just debating Baileys and flavored Baileys. So Michelle is a purist, and
Yeah.
absolutely anything else is a terrible thing. I've not tried the other flavors yet, but I'm a massive fan of Terry's chocolate orange. So the thought of Terry's chocolate orange Baileys sounds great. But don't know. Anybody else do Baileys at Christmas? I'd be intrigued to know. What's your tipple at Christmas, Chris?
Well, going back to the Africa theme amarula, which is
Oh,
a cream liqueur. Anyone had
mm,
that? Have you ever had
mm.
that,
Mm.
Anthony?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very
It's
nice.
along the same vein, but it goes quite nicely into a hot chocolate.
Mm.
Very nice.
Is Amarula the one that's coffee flavored? Does that have
No,
no, what am I thinking of there
no,
then? That's
that's something else, I think.
yeah.
Amaretto.
No,
Um,
that's Amaretto's, God forbid, the one that's marzipan flavor.
mm,
Oh, Amarula is lush. Yeah, Sean's down with that as well. Dawn is not a fan of the chocolate orange Baileys. Doesn't quite take like Baileys or chocolate orange.
I agree.
Getting the worst of both worlds then. No,
You
can't.
just have to have a Baileys while eating a chocolate orange, and then you'll get the best.
It's a
Uh,
good plan.
Best of both.
uh, yeah, Disaronno, is that the one that's marzipan-y? I don't know. I don't do marzipan. I've got to be honest with you. I think that is the devil's work. I think that is the most appalling stuff ever. So I'm just going to point out, just looking at the people who've arrived in the room today, and Laura Cook is hiding in the waiting room. Well, in the waiting room, in the sort of the audience today. So Laura, you can say hello as well. And I hope you've got over your hangover.
Good
That's all I'm saying. Um,
to
right,
chat.
fab. Um, yeah. Disaronno is the marzipan one. Amaretto, delicious over ice.
Mm.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean they're all good. I have to say, there's not much, but apart from brandy, don't do brandy. But anyway, back to the point of today's session. Matt is unfortunately not with us today. He's taken a trip to the vets with his dog. So he'll be back again tomorrow. But today I'm delighted to be joined by Chris and Michelle, here to talk about Skillbridge and what's the situation really primarily with supporting students in apprenticeship. So thank you both for joining us. Absolute pleasure to have two people I've known through the industry for a very long time sort of join us on the call today. So welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I suppose before we do sort of talk Skillbridge, I mean, Chris, you've been sort of in and around the sector for a good many years now.
Yeah, I think it's 16 or so
Mm.
now. So yeah, gives away my age, I think.
I was just going to say
Still a
the same
given.
thing.
Yeah, yeah, there's a bit of a joke in the sector. I think that the only role I hadn't done was mental health mentor. So I've done a few different roles over the years. Started as a note taker 16 years ago, actually, electronic note taker,
Yeah.
and a study skills tutor. Went on to be an assessor. And I'm the kind of center manager for a while. Had the pleasure of working with Michelle 10 years ago, and now we're working together again, which is quite nice. You know, it's a nice sector, isn't it? Small sector,
Yeah,
Mm.
kind of
it is.
see people, and yeah, that's been great. And then, yeah, more recently, yeah, just working with Skillbridge and Learning Support Centre, which I'm going to talk about in a sec. So I won't give too much away.
No, awesome. Thank you, Chris. It's yeah, a genuine pleasure to have you on at long last. We've been doing this for a couple of years and dying for a reason to bring you on. So I'm delighted to welcome you. And Michelle, I feel kind of funny introducing Michelle as a colleague, but welcome, Michelle, to today's
Thank
session.
you. Great to be here. Yeah. And like Chris, I think both of us come from a place where, supporting learners with additional needs has always been at the heart of our work. So great opportunity to work with Chris again across Skillbridge Solutions.
Very much appreciated. And I don't think, certainly historically, apprenticeships have sort of, been given a huge amount of consideration when it's come to reasonable adjustments and all the sort of good things that we sort of take for granted in sort of workplace and education. And somebody did say to me the other day, is that because they kind of fall between the two, because it's education in the workplace and is therefore fall between two stools almost? But it was an interesting sort of observation I felt. Um,
Mm.
in terms of publicity around apprenticeships as well, certainly we've noticed as a family with my boys sort of getting that bit older and looking at their sort of roots now into the workplace, that's the role of apprenticeships has become much more prominent. And is there a significant shift towards that?
I
Yeah, I
think
think so. And I think it's it's a really interesting point about the adjustments. Is that because traditionally apprenticeships were on the tools, if you like,
Mm.
electricians, plumbers, where perhaps there wasn't that academic
Mm.
element of it. But certainly that has changed. And we're seeing a lot in the press, a lot of headlines about apprenticeships getting more and more
Mm.
emphasis. So there's that side of it. But the degree apprenticeship side, you can study architecture, and a whole range of courses. And Anthony, like you, my daughter's only year seven, so we've got a few years to go. But already thinking, unless she wants to do something traditional like medicine, that's probably the one you can't do an apprenticeship in
Yep.
just yet.
Just yet. Yep.
That's probably for the best as well, where people are involved. Definitely something to consider.
Mm.
We've taken on a marketing apprentice recently as at the Learning Sports Centre, and she's been absolutely brilliant.
Mm.
Really come in and hit the ground running. So we're a big fan of them outside of Skillbridge as well.
It is a fascinating one. I mean, there was recent sort of news about sort of funding for additional 50,000 apprenticeships, and like 700 something million sort of being sort of pumped into that. And with increasing university fees and the opportunity to earn what you learn, as the old phrase goes, yeah, I can see sort of there's a lot of attraction in there. And I'll be honest, I wasn't really aware before several months ago that apprenticeships were anything beyond that sort of straight out of school at the age of 16 into engineering, plumbing, that sort of thing. That was what my brother did. And that there are degree level apprenticeships. In complete naivety, is that a relatively new thing, or have they been around for a while?
They have, and they go up to kind of master's level, level seven. Although recently funding for that's been reduced, and I think the idea of the government there is to put more into the entry level apprenticeships, and that
Hmm.
certainly the undergrad ones are still very much funded
Yeah.
at the moment. And the learners we tend to work with who are needing that academic support tend to be in that kind of category, but support is available throughout all of them.
Hmm. Interesting. Good, good, good. Happy days. Right. I think rather than me sort of ramble on, because this is a subject I think is relatively new to a lot of people. So I'm going to hand over to you two guys to give us a better sort of understanding of what Skillbridge is about and what support is there for students who would benefit from it. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. Let me know if you need anything.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. I am going to share a few slides. So let's just check that those are coming up now, and it's the right screen. Is that all good, Michelle? Anthony? No?
not yet.
Oh, no, yet. Oh, I haven't clicked the right button. That's fine.
Yeah, all good
It's the
now.
most challenging part, isn't it?
It is.
But there we go. And
At
then
least it didn't
finally,
go wrong like it did the other day, and I had to drive the slides myself. That was a shocking moment, but yes, it's
yeah, and
all
then
looking good,
finding the
Chris.
button to stop sharing them again is the next challenge. Great. So, Skillbridge, I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to what it is we do. I'm going to touch a little bit on Ofsted and the kind of regulation around that, and then I'm going to hand over to Michelle to talk a bit more about our service and how we support apprentices. So, going straight in, the Skillbridge team is made up of some familiar faces, and certainly if you've been on these webinars for the last 2 weeks, you've probably seen quite a lot of two of them. You may not know Laura Cook, who is on the call today, in the background. So Laura Cook is the founder and managing director of the Learning Support Centre. A little bit about us. I say us because I work with the Learning Support Centre and Skillbridge. It's based in Leicester. We are the sixth largest DSA NMH provider. We support about 2,000 students per year through 250 support staff. And the reason I thought this was worth including is because that level of support that we provide in higher education is also available to apprentices. So we've got highly qualified tutors and mentors. And in the apprenticeship sector, there isn't a lot of hard and fast regulation about things like qualifications of support staff. And a lot of the time we have to kind of use our experience in how we deliver support. So I think having an apprenticeship provider that comes from a place of delivering support over 15, 20 years is really important. And we also have a business called the Learning Support Academy, which delivers sector training courses, including a level 5 diploma for teaching learners with specific learning difficulties and note-taking courses. So we tend to upskill our own people within that. And again, that's something we're really passionate about. Yeah, that's really a little bit of the background on Learning Support Centre. And it is, I'm just trying to move the next slide on. There we go. And Skillbridge is really a partnership between Aventido, Anthony, Matt, and Laura, and LSC. And the rest of the senior team, Michelle's on the call with me today, and you're going to hear from her in a minute. You've heard a bit about me, and then Donna, who's our operations director, also makes up that team. And so between us, we've spent a long time in the sector. And when we look at apprenticeship support, we kind of see some parallels with how the DSA was 15 or 20 years ago, where it's kind of emerging. And there's a lot of good practice going on, but people are feeling their way a little bit. And interestingly, that seems to be growing. Awareness seems to be growing of it now. So a really exciting time, actually, to be in apprenticeships. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Ofsted, which might sound a bit dull for a Tuesday morning, but it's quite relevant because there has just been a new inspection framework from Ofsted, and this includes any apprenticeship training providers. So all the people we work with will now be inspected under this new framework that's just come in from November. And one of the main changes in this framework is that inclusion is now its own evaluation area. It gets graded and given a grade on the inspection alongside other areas. And in the previous framework, inclusion was mentioned, but it didn't have its own area. So that was a big change on this one. And what that evaluation area covers is considering how leaders and staff identify and support apprentices' needs. And there is a link to this inspection toolkit, which Michelle's just going to drop in the chat there if you want to go and have more of a look at that. And so just to summarize what's included within that evaluation area, it's about 5 or 6 pages and worth a read. If you're involved with apprenticeships, absolutely worth a read because it includes apprentices who receive additional support with their learning, but it also makes reference to those who face barriers to well-being. So we might provide mental health mentors through apprenticeship funding. And inspectors are going to focus on how providers establish this culture where early and accurate assessment of apprenticeship needs are prioritized. They're going to look at how providers reduce barriers to apprentices' education, training, and well-being to support development. And I thought this was an interesting one for them to include. They're going to check how providers consult with external specialists and implement advice, ensuring that appropriate, reasonable adjustments are made. So that's what's in there. A lot more than that, but I'm just going through a quick whistle-stop tour of it now. And as you would expect with Ofsted, there is this grading that's available right through from exceptional to urgent improvement. And I think some of the providers we're talking to are very keen to get this right and maybe not start with an exceptional standard, but certainly be working towards that for their provision. So a couple of things that would come up that would flag as needing urgent improvement. And again, there's talk of leaders here, leaders taking responsibility for this. So that comes up a few times in the guidance. But one of the points that would cause that kind of poor score is leaders not identifying and assessing apprentices' needs effectively, or they're assessing them, but then they're not implementing. So whatever they're doing is not having a meaningful impact on provision. So there's a lot there about what is put in place, but then measuring how that is working and then adjusting if necessary. And the Ofsted guidance that the funding for apprentices comes from the Department for Education, used to be ESFA, Education Skills and Funding Agency, but it now comes via DFE, Department for Education, and Ofsted makes a nod to that there is this dedicated funding available to support the apprentices, and providers should certainly be using that ethically and responsibly and with good audit trails, but using it to support the learners who need it. So that was just a quick kind of touch on Ofsted and where apprenticeship support fits in. But I'm going to hand over to Michelle now, who's going to talk us through a little bit of what we do through Skillbridge. So Michelle, all yours.
Thank you. So, as Chris has discussed with Ofsted, introducing this, I suppose, a distinct graded system for inclusion within this inspection framework, the way that training providers identify and then support the apprentices, it's now directly linked to those inspection outcomes. And that means really that the needs assessment and the ongoing support, they're really going to become more central to quality, to de-risk, and also for that accountability that's going to be needed. And I suppose in practical terms, how the needs are identified, how that support is implemented, and how the impact is evidenced. It's all much more visible now. So it's important to have processes in place that are robust, that are consistent, and I suppose as well that they are defensible. And that's exactly where Skillbridge Solutions comes in. So I think this slide really captures what we do in practice. What we can offer really is a full end-to-end additional learning support service, or what we can do is complement your existing provision, because we really do recognize that some elements of the journey for apprentices, it's often already carried out in-house, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But I suppose what I'm keen to reinforce here is that our approach will really complement any existing processes, and that's helpful because it will provide, I suppose, that joined up experience for apprentices accessing the support. And then it will also ensure that there's a collaborative process for everyone that's involved in delivering the support too. So essentially, our service is designed to really align with what you have already, what you're already doing. And at the core of that model, then, of our model, I suppose, is a simple evidence-led pathway. So that will look at mandatory screening, looking at the needs assessment, assistive technology, software, hardware, and the assistive technology training as well, which is really critical. And then that one-to-one well-being and neurodiversity support. So with the screening, it really just helps to identify the need, the learning differences, those well-being needs as well, as Chris mentioned earlier on. And often they can flag risk before it becomes maybe, withdrawal from a course or a failure. And what's really important about that too is that it creates that clear auditable entry point where there's a referral on for funded support or for the needs assessment. And that really does support those Ofsted inclusion expectations around early identification. That's really, really important. In this model, then, each stage will build on the one before it. With that needs assessment, I like to think of the needs assessment sitting right at the heart of the learner journey. And that's really the single source of truth that connects everything together throughout the whole process. Every recommendation coming out of that needs assessment has that clear line of sight. So you have the barrier or the impact, the recommendation, the cost, and the outcome, linking to those kind of practical recommendations. And always with the needs assessment as well, I think it's really important to reinforce that it's very person-centered, it's strength-based, and although it's diagnosis aware, it's never really diagnosis led because two learners with the same diagnosis can have very, very different needs. So it's focused really on that kind of functional impact. and it's also fully audit ready. So it helps to create that clear evidence-based plan that works for the apprentice and the provider and provides that evidence that's required to claim back that learning support funding at that appropriate level, whatever that is. And I think what's really important here as well is when an individual comes away from a needs assessment, they should feel heard, they should feel hopeful, confident, understood. And I think as well, the provider will come away from this with a clear, fundable plan. And when you have those two things together, you have a really high quality needs assessment, and that's critical for everyone involved. So in our model, it's the needs assessment will define those barriers. The assistive technology and the training helps to remove the friction. The training will build the confidence as well, and then that one-to-one support, sustaining that independence over time. So I suppose it's really about not just giving the right tools, it's about giving them the skills and the confidence to use those tools in the real world as well. And with this model, this slide, I really see this as kind of having a golden thread running through it from the very start of that apprenticeship journey right through to that successful completion. And it's a connected journey. And that's really, I think, important as well for the apprentice to feel supported consistently and empowered at every stage of that journey too. And also, as well as Chris alluded to, uh, really important for these new inclusion standards, where inspectors now expect to see that swift identification of need, that graduated assess, plan, do, review. That comes up quite a lot. And Chris will probably speak about that later on. Assess, plan, do, review approach, where there's effective use of the funding and there's those clear measurable outcomes. Having this joined up journey, I think everything is focused on the well-being and the achievement of the apprentice. I think when things are more fragmented, both learners and the providers, they're more exposed to risk. So this really helps to de-risk everything. May I have the next slide, Chris? Thank you. I feel like I'm in COVID times again. And assistive technology is a key part of this apprentice journey. It's really crucial for apprentices because it removes the practical barriers in that real world training in the workplace environment. So things like writing reports, managing portfolios, task management, time management, and just participating confidently. Assistive technology really is critical to help an individual master all of that. And at Skillbridge Solutions, every assistive technology recommendation is driven again by that needs assessment. We want to make sure that every tool is clearly aligned to a specific impact or a barrier, a functional impact. And to make sure that these tools are, I suppose, fully understood, that they're used appropriately, confidently, we've created this assessor technology hub on our Skillbridge Solutions website. Chris will probably drop the link to that into the chat. But what this does is it will provide that targeted guidance really to support effective implementation. So basically it helps the assessor to match the technology to the needs. And it ensures that the technology then supports the specific barriers that are identified and aligns with the activities that the apprentice needs to carry out. We also run, in partnership with our sister company Avantito, dedicated webinars on how these solutions can, directly help apprentice learners with additional needs. And we can also provide training for assessors and providers across a suite of assistive technology solutions as well. And I suppose alongside this assistive technology and the assistive technology training, as Chris mentioned earlier, the neurodiversity and wellbeing coaches, they'll play a key role in translating all of this into real life strategies. So again, helping apprentices to build that confidence, independence, and sustainable ways of working. And at Skillbridge as well, what we'll do with all of this is we'll do individual summaries for all of the training, and we'll do quarterly reviews as well. So those check-in points, again, really important to look at those measurable outcomes. Oh, and while I'm on the subject of training, just in case I forget, I wanted to mention as well that we can also provide neurodiversity training for management and teams if any of that is of interest. Please just make contact with us afterwards and we'll be able to provide more details on that. And next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. So I touched on this really briefly, how Skillbridge can operate either as that fully end-to-end additional learning support partner or as a specialist complement to your existing provision. And using that method, it can kind of, I suppose, strengthen any pain points or pressure points without duplicating any provision that's already in place at your organization. And what the free apprenticeship service audit will do, it's a really good starting point, I suppose, because It gives an immediate and I suppose an objective view of the risk, compliance issues, and the opportunities that are there against the new inclusion standards. And it just helps us to map exactly what's working well for you within your organization, where there are gaps, and where we can work maybe to look at any of those gaps in terms of support, funding, evidencing the impact, and where any improvements can be made. And that can really help to ensure then that the inclusion practice is audit ready, that it's, I suppose, inspection secure, and that it's very robust. And I suppose a key takeaway here is that you don't have to have it all figured out before you start. All you need is that commitment to inclusion, a willingness to partner, and we can bring the rest. So again, if you do want to reach out to us, I think Chris will put up a contact slide there, and our contact details are on that.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, appreciate we've covered a lot, and we should have actually said put your questions in the chat at the beginning. But we're very happy to take questions or discussion or comments. So yeah, feel free to do that. We've put some of the links in the chat as well. Anthony.
Yeah, quick question from me. I guess we're okay to share the slides with our delegates today.
Absolutely. Yep. I'll get those over to Hannah afterwards.
Good stuff.
I'll stop sharing now as well, so we can.
No, that's interesting. One couple of questions actually sent separately. But one of the questions was around the screening. So, I mean, I know there's been a lot of media attention around screening for all school age pupils, which has been spearheaded by Jamie Oliver. We don't see mandatory screening at university level, although we have the DSA. We don't see it in the workplace, but we do see it in apprenticeships. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct, and that's a good way to kind of summarize it, because each of them are slightly different. So for the DSA, you need a full diagnostic assessment usually for support, but with apprenticeships, you need to screen everyone, but you don't need a full diagnostic to put support in place. It's also, the guidance is also fairly vague on what that screening needs to look like. So it doesn't need to be a specific tool. There's not an approved list at all. It's really that providers are satisfying themselves that they're doing a robust screening of apprentices, and those that might have additional needs are then moving on down that pathway. So we use a tool called the Do It Profiler. There's more on that on the website. We feel that's a very strong tool that's been developed by Professor Amanda Kirby, who's been in this sector for a very long time, has a lot of experience. And we use that if you take the end-to-end process. But equally, if you're a university that has one of the other tools in place, you can refer them to us then at point of needs assessment, and we'll pick up the journey from there.
Yeah, sounds just great. Yeah, the Do It Profiler is a very, very great resource. Interesting question from Rosie. Is there anything about apprenticeships that surprised you when you first started sort of looking into this area of support? Because it, and I don't mean this in a negative fashion, but it doesn't feel like it's gone through the sort of the maturing process of, say, DSA or access to work at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really great question as well. And yes, the guidance, there's plenty of guidance, but it's not as specific. So if you've worked in DSA for a long time, you'll know that there's a kind of assessor guidance document that comes out from SFE. There's a new version every year, and I think it's 100 or so pages, and you can find a lot of information in there. There's nothing specific like that in apprenticeships. So what's interesting in the conversations we have are providers questioning whether they should be putting things through, and not sure about that, not sure whether it's going to, if they claim it back, whether they're then going to be told they shouldn't have done that. And I think probably the message there is, if you're evidencing it and you're showing a need, then you can present that at audit. And what's always stuck with me is a comment from one auditor who said, look, we're not assessment professionals.
Mm.
If an assessor, needs assessor, says a student needs this bit of software, we're not going to turn around and argue on that bit because you're the people who understand it. But it's about having all that evidence and checking throughout the apprenticeship that it's still needed. So we've used the word evidence a lot, but that's probably a key word.
I gotta say, I'm excited by an audit body that appreciates that professionals know what they're talking about. That's I like the sound of that. That's a wonderful thing.
It might not
Um,
be all of them. That was just one comment, but yeah, we can be hopeful.
I'll take that. That sounds good. You mentioned sort of medical evidence, in terms of, obviously sort of the screening is there. Um, is there a need for medical evidence in the same way, or diagnosis, or sort of referrals, or is it just, from the screener and then on through, basically based on what are the needs of the individual rather than a label?
Absolutely. So I guess in that way, it's closer to access to work
Mm,
or workplace support. Yes, so there's not the need for that.
no.
Um, Obviously, if an apprentice turns up with
Mm,
a diagnostic report and says, I've had
yeah.
this, we're not going to ignore it.
Yeah.
That's really helpful for the assessor as a starting point for the conversation.
Yeah. No, interesting. Uh, Great question from Mary Ald, which I'm going to paraphrase because I think there might be a spelling. Is the threat still there that funds can be reclaimed if the audit is not satisfied? That's not a question I've come across personally.
Yeah, I think there is
Mm,
that threat. And perhaps not having the clear guidance,
mm,
it then makes that a bit more difficult. I think what that emphasizes is the importance of the needs assessment
mm.
report
Yeah.
for me. Interestingly, we were on the apprenticeship forum with quite a few universities, and the questions that come up are about the more outlying items that are recommended. So what I mean by that is there was a question recently about taxi allowance. So the rules around taxi allowance are quite set in
Mm,
DSA, how you do it, two quotes, student can have these journeys.
yeah.
They're not, but some providers are claiming back travel allowance where it's justified.
No, sounds good. Hannah asks an interesting question, which I'll just dig into a little bit. Has the profiling ever been used by employers to support this type of support in the workplace? Um, so in the context of workplace apprenticeships, so employers that are sort of putting apprentices forward, would that be the case, Chris?
That's a really, really good question. And I think it would really depend on the what the apprentice wants to
Mm,
disclose to their employer first of all. So they could go right through, have this apprenticeship support and not say anything to the employer.
mm,
We'd hope that disclosing to the employer would be a positive thing and saying, look, I've had this screening, I could use some additional support.
yeah.
That they could do that. Again, I think it would be on more of a case by case basis, to use a very DSA term. Yeah, Michelle, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think sometimes the dual profilers, I've seen it used more in the public sector rather than the private sector. I don't know if that's because sometimes it's used heavily at universities and things like that. Just thinking of my
Mm,
background working in Ireland and working with apprentices, it was used quite heavily in the apprenticeship area, but not so much in the private sector.
interesting. I have seen some employers use it as a sort of a benefit in kind, a perk of the job. That's they offer sort of screening for you and your family, just to sort of give you an idea if you have additional needs. I think the thing to distinguish with the profiling is the difference between that and, say, the needs assessment with, recommendations dependent on your needs. So the screener will generally identify that you probably have needs, whereas the assessment of need is what would then sort of give the sort of the output that says, okay, these solutions would help you in these ways, and these are the sort of the non-medical help that you would benefit from, is my understanding.
And I think, just following on that question there from Hannah, the recommendations in the report may well also be helpful in the workplace. In terms of the funding, the tools that are funded are designed to be used for the apprenticeship bit of the apprenticeship. But if those were helpful for that, then you could go into the workplace and look at how those are funded, whether through the employer or through access to work. Very transferable tools.
I think the bit I love about the apprenticeship system at the moment, as much as anything, is the 3 month reviews, so that it's not just DSA, for example, or access to work, where you get assessed right at the very start, and off you go. And who knows how your needs change and develop, and your circumstances and everything else. Whereas those reviews seem like an excellent thing. Anna says, yeah, I think it'd be super useful as eventually where people land after. It's a personal opinion, but I think screening as far as everybody, whether they're in sort of education, workplace, or beyond, if they want access to it, should be there. I think some of the barriers that are in place around having to get a diagnosis, the cost of diagnosis, the waiting times for diagnosis, as anybody with kids who've tried to go through that process is astonishing, and a very negative process. It's a very sort of deficit model. Yeah, don't get me started on that one. But yeah, I think as an employer, everybody has different needs. We don't all work the same. We don't use the same mice, the same keyboards, the same screens, the same programs, the same working patterns. Anything that helps people be their best person in work or in education has got to be a good thing. Sorry, Michelle, were you going to chip in there?
No, I was just reading the questions in the chat. That's all.
Sorry, thought I saw a sort of a nod, but
no. I was just looking at Rosie's question. Just going back to a profiler. Rosie has a question there about how the apprentice's own perspective is captured. The do a profiler is very strength based, and I think that needs assessment then in consultation with the learner, and then as you mentioned, those check-in points, those reviews, again critical to marry all of those things up to the entire journey, not just, as you said at the beginning, that there's those check-in points and that measurable impact throughout the whole process.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I have to say, I'm genuinely excited to see how this matures, especially as certainly my oldest son is definitely looking to sort of go into an apprenticeship, and that's becoming a more common thing. You see the sort of the debts that students come out with at the moment is terrifying, and some people just aren't wired that way, in terms of their sort of their personality and who they are and what they want to do in life. So I think the more that attracts people into apprenticeships and support around that is a really, really exciting thing. So we look forward to being part of that journey. Awesome. Good. If there's no other questions for Chris and Michelle, Chris has just popped the contact details up there again in the chat. We'll also make sure they're shared on email with everybody who's registered afterwards. And we'll get Hannah to share out the slides as well. And if anybody would like further information, do reach out to Chris and Michelle. There's a feedback form. If anybody gets the opportunity to do the feedback form, we do appreciate it, because we think we're doing okay, but we equally sort of we need your sort of perspectives on how we can make things better. Chris, Michelle, any last comments before I put the poll up?
No, just great to come along today, and please do reach out if you have any questions. It'd be great to hear from you.
Thank you, Laura. Next time you're on the camera, all right. Right, I'm just going to launch the poll while I just double check what our early Christmas present giveaway is today. And I believe it is a Salter Chocolatier hot chocolate maker. No.
Very nice.
I'm going to go back to the Bailey's question. Can we put a bit of Bailey's in the hot chocolate and then sort of whiz it up? I think that would be good. Awesome. Good. Right. And the numbers are coming in on the poll. We've gone subtle. Everyone's gone for a subtle twinkle, which is a relief. We travel across to North Wales on a regular basis, and there's one particular house that this time of year is visible from space. It's sort of two sides on, and every single square inch is there with some form of design on it. It's astonishing. It's a, I don't know if I can call it a work of art, but it's definitely a passion project for somebody. Right, I'm just going to end that poll, but yeah, we definitely got to a subtle twinkle there. Um, Kareen, absolutely. Sean needs to be seen from space. Don't disappear yet, guys. We haven't done the draw. Jamie, absolute pleasure, no problem at all. Ryan, instead of Bailey's, whiskey, and instead of hot chocolate, whiskey. I'm with you, Ryan. I think that's a damn good choice. Yeah, fair play. Christos, Anthony, hot chocolate with rum. Ooh. Hmm. I'm gonna have to try that. I've got quite into rum with ginger ale at the moment. That's going down quite nicely. Mary Lavender. Ah, didn't see you were here, Mary. Lovely to have you on board. Yeah, all good. Gingerbread lattes. That sounds quite nice as well. That can have a rum in it. If anybody hasn't tried Glaver yet, I'm not plugging this. It's not mine. But Glaver, this was my Christmas present off the Secret Santa, and I do recommend that in a hot chocolate as well. That went down particularly nicely at the Christmas party. Right. Michelle, ladies first. I'm going to go to you for a number between 1 and 103, please.
Ooh, 72.
72. I could tell you that's the year I was born, but that would be.
That is not the year I was born. Let me just put that
All right.
out.
Right. Sorry, just scrolling through. Oh, as you can tell, I'm not as good at this as Chris is. So that is Dawn Wiltshire. Is Dawn Wiltshire still here? She was here earlier. She was talking about the chocolate orange, if I remember. Dawn is there. Oh, wow. Happy
Lovely.
days.
Congrats.
Dawn, fantastic. There'll be a chocolate maker coming your way. So Ryan's going to stop sharing that. So yeah, just remains for me to say, please join us again tomorrow for our sort of session on Purple Tuesday. It'll be my last one of the 1280s. Matt's will be back, and hopefully all is well with the dog as well. So we'll find out everything that's going on tomorrow. But yeah, if you could join us then, that would be great. And to say, Chris and Michelle, thank you very much as always. Really appreciate your time today, and yeah, look forward to catching up with you before Christmas is done. Anna, no problem at all. If everybody wants to run away now, they're very, very welcome. So just say goodbye to Kareen, to Vivian, Anna, pleasure. Gary, good to see you. See more of you soon, I'm sure. Andrew Vasey, thank you. Ryan Bowes, we'll see you soon. Rosie, yes, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Have a great break.
All good. Sammy Joe, yeah, we'll see you soon, I'm sure. Dawn, no problem at all. Hannah will be in touch to get your address so we can get that out to you this side of Christmas. I think we're still inside the delivery window for Christmas, so we should be all good on that one. Awesome. Right, in which case, the last people in the waiting room, or the room, I should say, are David Barnes, Dawn Wiltshire, Dylan Griffiths, and Sam Cox. So thank you, guys. Been an absolute pleasure. We'll see you all very, very soon. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Michelle. Speak soon.
Thanks, Anthony. Speak soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.